Imagine an army so vast, it stretched for miles across the horizon. An army led by the greatest military mind of his era, seemingly invincible. Yet, in the brutal winter of 1812, this colossal force vanished into the frozen plains of Russia, leaving behind a trail of unimaginable suffering. Was it truly General Winter that defeated Napoleon? Or was the fate of his Grande Armée sealed much earlier, by a single fateful decision on a blood-soaked battlefield? Join us as we uncover the real story behind one of history's most catastrophic military campaigns. By 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte stood at the zenith of his power. His French Empire dominated continental Europe, a testament to his strategic genius and relentless ambition. From the sun-drenched fields of Spain to the vast plains of Poland, his influence was absolute. However, one formidable power remained outside his direct control: Imperial Russia. Tsar Alexander I, though initially an ally, grew increasingly resentful of Napoleon's demands. This simmering tension would soon erupt into open conflict. At the heart of this growing animosity was Napoleon's continental system. This ambitious economic blockade aimed to cripple Great Britain by preventing any European nation from trading with it. Napoleon believed that cutting off British commerce would force them to their knees. Tsar Alexander I, however, found the system economically devastating for Russia. Its vast agricultural exports relied heavily on trade with Britain. Defying Napoleon, Alexander reopened Russian ports to British goods, a move Napoleon viewed as a direct betrayal and a challenge to his authority. Napoleon's response was swift and monumental. He began assembling the largest army Europe had ever witnessed, a force so immense it was dubbed the Grande Armée. Over 650,000 soldiers, drawn from across his vast empire, prepared for the invasion. This multinational force was a marvel of military organization, but also a logistical nightmare. Supplying such a massive army deep within Russia's vast territories would prove to be an unprecedented challenge. The sheer scale of the undertaking was both its greatest strength and its ultimate weakness. As Napoleon's colossal army crossed the Niemen River into Russia, they expected a decisive battle. However, the Russian commander, General Barclay de Tolly, had a different plan. He refused to engage in a pitched battle, opting instead for a strategic retreat. This retreat was accompanied by a devastating scorched-earth policy. Russian forces burned villages, destroyed crops, and poisoned wells, leaving nothing of value for the advancing French. This tactic turned Napoleon's march into a grueling ordeal, stretching his supply lines to their breaking point. The relentless march through the vast, desolate Russian landscape took a terrible toll. Disease, particularly typhus and dysentery, ravaged the ranks of the Grande Armée. Lack of clean water, poor sanitation, and inadequate food supplies created a breeding ground for illness. By August, even before a major engagement, Napoleon had already lost over 100,000 men. These were not casualties of battle, but victims of the harsh environment and the relentless attrition of the campaign. The army was bleeding out before it even reached its enemy. Napoleon finally tasted blood at Smolensk, but it was a bitter victory. The Russians, after a brief but fierce resistance, abandoned the city, setting it ablaze as they retreated. Napoleon found only ruins and a few thousand casualties, not the decisive engagement he craved. His frustration mounted. The Russians continued to evade him, drawing his army deeper and deeper into their vast territory. Napoleon desperately needed a major battle to break their will and force a surrender. Political pressure in Russia eventually forced a change in strategy. Tsar Alexander I replaced Barclay de Tolly with the revered General Mikhail Kutuzov, a veteran known for his cunning. Kutuzov understood the need to defend Moscow and chose a strong defensive position near Borodino, just 70 miles from the capital. The Russians meticulously prepared their defenses, constructing formidable earthworks, including the famous Great Redoubt and the Bagration flèches. These fortifications transformed the battlefield into a deadly killing ground, designed to inflict maximum casualties on any attacking force. On the eve of the battle, Napoleon's Marshal Davout proposed a brilliant flanking maneuver. He suggested taking 40,000 men to bypass the Russian defenses, a classic Napoleonic tactic that could have shattered their lines. This bold move offered a chance for a decisive victory. However, Napoleon, reportedly ill and uncharacteristically cautious, refused. He opted instead for a direct, frontal assault against the heavily fortified Russian positions. This decision, a departure from his usual aggressive brilliance, would have profound consequences. On September 7, 1812, the Battle of Borodino erupted with unprecedented ferocity. Nearly 1,200 cannons roared, shaking the very earth. French columns charged repeatedly into the Russian defenses, facing a hail of musket fire and artillery. The Bagration flèches, key Russian strongpoints, changed hands 8 times throughout the day, each assault and counter-assault adding to the horrific casualty count. The ground became soaked with blood, a testament to the brutal close-quarters fighting. By late afternoon, the Russian lines were stretched to their breaking point. Napoleon's marshals urged him to commit the Imperial Guard, his elite reserve of 18,000 veteran soldiers. Unleashing them could have broken the Russian center and secured a decisive victory. Yet Napoleon hesitated. Sick and cautious, he refused to risk his most prized troops, fearing for the future of his empire. This moment of indecision allowed the Russians, though battered, to retreat in relatively good order, their army still largely intact. Napoleon had his battlefield victory, but at a staggering cost. The French suffered an estimated 30,000 to 35,000 casualties, while the Russians lost even more, perhaps up to 45,000. It was a hollow triumph, a bloody stalemate rather than a decisive blow. The Grande Armée was severely weakened, its morale shaken, and its strategic objective, the destruction of the Russian army, unfulfilled. Borodino was not the end of the campaign, but a turning point that foreshadowed its tragic conclusion. A week later, Napoleon entered Moscow, expecting Tsar Alexander to sue for peace. Instead, he found an eerily empty city, its inhabitants having fled. His hopes of using Moscow as winter quarters and a base for negotiations were quickly dashed. That night, fires erupted across the city, set by Russian agents. For 4 days, Moscow burned, turning the ancient capital into a smoldering ruin. The strategic prize Napoleon had fought so hard for became a trap, denying his army shelter and supplies as winter approached. Weeks passed in Moscow with no word from Tsar Alexander. Supplies dwindled, and the harsh Russian winter began to set in. On October 19th, with no other option, Napoleon ordered the retreat. Only about 100,000 men remained of his once mighty army. The retreat was a nightmare beyond imagination. Hunger, frostbite, and exhaustion claimed countless lives. Soldiers resorted to eating horses, then their own leather gear, as discipline collapsed. Cossacks and partisan fighters relentlessly harried the retreating columns, picking off the weak and straggling. The crossing of the Berezina River became a symbol of the retreat's horrors. Thousands of men, desperate to escape, drowned in the icy waters or were cut down by Russian forces. The Grande Armée, once a symbol of power, was now a broken, desperate mob. By December, fewer than 100,000 men staggered back across the Neman River, and some estimates suggest only 27,000 were still combat-ready. The once invincible Grande Armée had been utterly annihilated, a testament to the combined forces of Russian resistance and the brutal environment. While General Winter undoubtedly played a crucial role in the final destruction of the Grande Armée, the death sentence was arguably signed much earlier. Napoleon's hesitation at Borodino, his refusal to commit the Imperial Guard, turned a potential decisive victory into a bloody, costly stalemate. That single decision allowed the Russian army to survive intact, denying Napoleon the strategic advantage he desperately needed. It was the beginning of the end for Napoleon Bonaparte, a turning point shaped not by the weather, but by a moment of uncharacteristic caution from a military genius. The story of Napoleon's Russian campaign is a powerful reminder of how single decisions can alter the course of history. It highlights the complex interplay of strategy, logistics, environment, and leadership in warfare. Understanding these moments helps us appreciate the intricate tapestry of our past. If you found this deep dive into Napoleon's fateful campaign fascinating, Make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more captivating historical analyses, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. What other historical turning points would you like us to explore? Let us know in the comments below.